So we're sitting down today live at Solana Policy Institute's Wall Street event here in New York City. And our guest is Lily Liu. She is the president of the Solana Foundation. And we are here in New York City, as I said, but we always ask our guests this first question, and it is, what does crypto in America mean to you?
I think that what do we love about America? America has always been the beacon of innovation, of entrepreneurship, seeing new trends and making the most out of them, being optimistic about possibility, about technology, and also being the center of financial markets. When you put all of that together, it's been such a long time coming that the US should be the leader in crypto. It's at the intersection of tech and finance. It's pushing the boundaries of the things that the US is already far and away the world leader in, which is technological innovation. And if you look over the last number of years, even under the very hostile administration from 2020 to 2024, New York still during that time became like the crypto capital of the Western world. So it was in spite of every effort that was tried, delivered to squash this industry, that the energy, the desire was still there, and came to New York, which actually historically has been one of the most hostile places for crypto, starting with the BIT license back in, 2015? And so I think that that really highlights how in the US, it's not a singular place. So many different opinions, so many different perspectives, all out in the open, as you would expect in a vibrant, open society. But then ultimately within that, the energy of innovation, of entrepreneurship, of creating something new and finding new ways to serve a broader and broader audience really should be at the heart of I think, what it means to be American, and is at the heart of at least how I interpret crypto. And so I think it's the natural home.
Given that we are in this financial capital, I'm wondering how many times we could say that during this recording. But looking past over the past 5 years for Solana specifically, you guys have wanted to become this foundational financial infrastructure. How has that held up, changed, and what has surprised you the most about it? 3 questions in one.
Sure. I don't think that that vision has really changed, to be honest. I think that the trend of the time within the crypto industry has morphed every cycle. If we look back to 2015, so I got involved in 2013, 2014, and it was Bitcoin, and then there was a trend around private blockchain. There was the ICO era, there was the NFT gaming and kind of creator era, and I think we've come full circle into understanding that blockchains are fundamentally about financial infrastructure. That financial infrastructure can be used for the whole range of applications. Yes, you can use it in gaming, but it's more about financial infrastructure than it is about so-called Web3. So I think the original vision, if you look at Tolly's original pitch, it was NASDAQ at the speed of light. And so the original vision has always been, this is global financial infrastructure. Any validator can join, leave the network. It's permissionless. And what you create by putting all of that together is this idea that you can actually build a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, which that's the original name of the white paper, the Bitcoin white paper. The original name of the Bitcoin white paper is not digital gold. It's actually a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, and this idea that you would have financial infrastructure native to the internet that anyone on the internet could access, could use, and whether that be for payments, whether that be for high-frequency trading, but it'd be this open infrastructure, the TCP/IP of money. We've called it many things throughout the last couple of decades, and that would be as foundational for value transfer, for money, for relative scarcity, as the internet as we know it today is so foundational for the global transmission of information. And that just made so much sense to me, and I think that in crypto over the last decade, two decades, there's been such a variety of different perspectives as to what are blockchains actually good for? What is their core use case? And to me, having sort of experienced this whole range of different trends, ultimately what it's always about is it's tech for finance. It doesn't have to be anything else. That's big enough. And all of the ways that people use money being built on top of that, that one thing is enough of an innovation for us to be able to serve.
And so, Lily, speaking of your experience, you've had a diverse range of traditional finance experience from Morgan Stanley to KKR to McKinsey. There's been a lot of talk at the summit today about like CFI versus DeFi, how they fit together on the institutional level. Given your experience with institutions, what do you think they're actually looking for, and what is Solana delivering? Where do you see that going?
Sure. So I feel like the first 10 or 20 years in crypto is dominated really by developers. And when people from the developer perspective talk about products, they think about applications. When finance people use the word product, they actually mean an asset. And so this now becomes the sort of orthogonal intersection of the worlds that we live in, because blockchains are tech for finance, so they kind of bring together these two different audiences, but one is thinking entirely about an application, and one is thinking entirely about assets and asset distribution. And by and large, I think when it comes to CFI and TradFi, the two kind of primary buckets of how they're looking at crypto are, one is crypto's backend infrastructure, right? I can do even interbank settlement more quickly and efficiently. I can do settlement of complex derivative products eventually much more efficiently using a ledger. Separate question as to whether you actually need a permissionless ledger to do that. In many cases, that's kind of been the rub over the last 10 years as to whether you're better off using some form of a permissioned, let's call it private blockchain. That was the trend from 2015. And then the other one is really around distribution. And one of the primary business models, the simplest business model, is you take management fee off of assets under management. And so if you can distribute a financial product to an ever wider audience, then that's just very simple math. So I think the biggest value proposition that crypto has brought, crypto, blockchain, Web3, whatever you want to call it, has brought to traditional finance is actually presenting a clear business case that, look, this industry has $2 to $3 trillion worth of assets, of wealth, sitting in this new, let's call it a new asset class. And that amount of wealth at some point may want to diversify into something other than holding pure Bitcoin. And so I think that's been the simplest part of it. That started probably a couple of years ago when this industry actually scaled to a very significant size, and portended the possibility that this would be, at the very least, a new pool of wealth in which to distribute one's assets, starting with money market funds, and in the future, other sorts. So I think that's been the trailhead. But then over time, as people get more into it and understand all the different things you can do on DeFi, it starts with the very simple, okay, I can sell my asset to more people and take, clip my 25 bips, 50 bips, whatever it might be, to now there's more ways to make that capital immediately useful also to that broader audience. And so, one example that resonates with, I think, many of us even here is, I've got no issue, and I don't think any of us have an issue with accessing brokerage accounts and being able to buy, the full spectrum of assets that are produced by this city. So I can buy Apple stock, but what I cannot do on Schwab today is I cannot collateralize it and borrow against my Apple stock. And those are the types of things that you can very easily do with essentially no cost, instantly, without having to fill out 50 pages worth of forms. And so immediately, the ability to even just exercise collateral value on your assets makes DeFi instantly more productive outside of just being able to distribute your assets. So I think those types of, that sort of incremental exposure to the ease of use, the ease of distribution, and I think very eventually just this recognition that when you are natively issued on the internet, right, your ability to distribute is just so fundamentally different. It's kind of like with the original version of the internet, if you just look at the way we used to distribute and consume movies, it used to be that if Hollywood was coming out with Mission Impossible in 1996, what did they do? The Hollywood studio would go negotiate with AMC and Regal.
You're going in person, yeah.
Right, going in person, and that was like the big thing,
Yeah.
July, and you make a whole weekend out of it, maybe around July 4th or something like that, Mission Impossible in America, and you would negotiate with oligopoly player A, oligopoly player B. I think at McKinsey I actually did a study in movie theaters, so I guess that dates me as well. And that's the way you distributed, right? You went through these distribution networks that got built up over decades, if not even over a century. And that's similar to how assets get distributed today. You've got your equity capital markets desk at a wholesale bank, and they call the wealth managers the RIAs, and that's the distribution pyramid. And so that's kind of like the movie theater example. And then with the internet, what you could do is, whether it's YouTube for shorter form content or Netflix now for feature length content, you essentially upload your content to the internet, and your distribution is not tens of millions, or like, Blowout Weekend for Mission Impossible would have been tens of millions, 8-figure audience, and now on Netflix, you're at 9-figure audience instantly, with a much faster turnaround cycle, and it's just completely changed the distribution game. And so if that's how we've been distributing entertainment content, I think what the blockchain does is makes assets and financial product distribution as available, 24/7 distribution. Anyone on the internet can theoretically access it, of course, with various restrictions that are going to be specific to the apps and the assets. And I think that's what's so powerful about it. And I think increasingly people are seeing that as being the potential. And if you think about it, the most important thing in finance is liquidity. And one of the things I feel like I've learned over the last 10, 15 years as someone who's been sometimes a little bit more of a tech person, sometimes a little bit more of a finance person, is to think, okay, well, is it the app that matters more, or is it the market that matters more? And I'm now very firmly of the conviction that no one is ever bigger than the market. The market will always win, liquidity will always win, and people will ultimately trade off every last thing in order to be part of the largest market. That's just the force of the market. That's kind of standing in the face of a tsunami. It doesn't matter how well you build the house. And so given that, the idea that you could potentially create a marketplace that would be available to 5.5 billion people, which is the population of people on the internet, there's no pool of liquidity which is ever going to be larger than that. And I think that ultimately that is the end of this kind of logic of, okay, well, if I can distribute to everyone on the internet, what does that mean? It means that you could potentially access the largest liquidity pool in the world that could possibly be created, and that's going to be more powerful than really anything else, which I think is also another reason why having unified architecture, and kind of go back to, okay, well, what are blockchains actually good for? I think that that reinforces why the architecture of Solana from the beginning has been the preferred one, because it prioritizes the number one thing about financial markets, which is having unified liquidity.
This is very much what you're describing as internet capital markets, right? Which is a big roadmap for Solana. I mean, we talk about it. How close are we to it? What's your sort of vision as president of the Solana Foundation? How far out are we from something like this, and what will it take to actually get there?
Well, I think what'd be pretty cool is, I don't know whether it's going to happen in 2026 or 2027, and whether this is going to happen from a US-based company or outside of the US. But I think it'd be pretty cool if the largest IPO of the year were done on Solana. And that might sound crazy today, but I don't think it's actually crazy. And I think that's going to be before, I think, 2027 or 2028. And therein, going back to the first question, is who wants to win that market, and who wants to compete for that market? And as I've had the privilege of talking to many, many different markets around the world, one thing that has become very apparent to me is going back to this broader point around liquidity and getting liquidity. What it means in the way that traditional capital markets are created is that, okay, so if you're a country, you want to go build a capital market, first you've got to attract capital. That's a little bit of an issue, because if you're a middle-income country, 10, 15 million population, and doing a good job developing your economy, but you're just like, hey, global institutional investor, how about you open a bank account? People are just like, I'd really rather not. Oh, it's a US dollar bank. I just really can't get it past my risk committee. Of course not. So what does that mean? It means that the back-end financial infrastructure stays more or less as it is, right? Because the network effect around money is so incredibly strong. That's why liquidity typically stays where it starts. And so what that means is that the ability for different companies, different producers, different even countries around the world to access capital markets, to have any sort of access to capital formation is actually stunningly limited. And that is just not something that, for many of us, having grown up in the US, is at all even a shade of our reality, right? And I think that is something that the internet opens up. We saw that in various forms with content production, content creation. Content creators really around the world don't even really know where they are because it's the content first. And I think that some corollary of that is already happening and is going to happen at pace as well with what's going to happen with crypto adoption going forward. And I think that, back to your earlier question around institutionalization, what that means is I think it's actually fairly welcome that now the quality and the breadth of underlying assets represented in the form of a token is now much broader and frankly higher quality than some of the stuff that we saw in many earlier stages of crypto. I think we'd all admit that during the ICO era, 99.8% of coffins on a blockchain never really needed to exist. And there's historically is a bit of this confusion between the underlying quality of an asset and a token, and they kind of see them as the same thing. No, a token is just a way of digitally representing some asset, and that asset can be all price and no value, like a meme coin. That asset can also be all value and no price, like a REIT, right? And so I think that as there's been a broader recognition that this is infrastructure, this is Rails, and you can wrap that around a wide variety of different products, that to me is a very welcome trend from institutions coming into the space. I've never seen it as it's either institutions or it's not either hoodies or suits. Because to say that this is not for traditional finance, it's not for the institutional world would just frankly be leaving out the dominant source of capital in the world, and that would be fairly self-limiting to think like that.
So what will it take to kind of get this shift in the market and pull the liquidity from the traditional financial world where most people IPO through a normal means of exchange outside of the crypto side? Obviously, most crypto companies, or not most, but a lot of them launch tokens and then they launch them on a decentralized exchange. What will it take to really hit that 2027, 2028 goal?
And do you know any companies that want to IPO on Solana?
What's that?
I said, do you know any companies that want to IPO on Solana? Has anyone expressed interest?
Certainly a few around the world as well.
Bring them out. No.
Name them.
Yeah.
Well, I think that they've got to be unique, interesting products, for sure. And you've got to be able to have additional utility around them. And so it's always got to start with the product quality itself. And I think that many of the things that we've experienced in crypto thus far, if you strip out a lot of the emotion around them, if you strip out a lot of the impressions, good, bad, and evil that you have around these huge volatility cycles that we've had, and just the starting from interesting to absurd narratives that have happened in each of these cycles. At the core, what has been happening? Well, you had this completely unique asset you could not get anywhere else with minimum 80% volatility, right? So from a financial product perspective, it was actually very attractive and drove a lot of adoption. Of course, many other things happened as well. But I think one way of looking at it, stripping out a lot, of course, is to see it as unique products attract a new audience. So I don't think that a number of the things that people focus on, which is, okay, I'm going to take an existing product and one-to-one mirror it, digital twin, put it on the blockchain. I think that's a good start in terms of running the traps on a new set of rails. Do that with a trusted asset that there's going to be demand for on the other side, and you run a few cycles on the whole commercial loop and the whole technical loop and the whole product loop. I think that's all great. But then eventually this has to be used for creating new markets somehow. And so those new markets got to be some combination definitionally of either new assets and or new assets to a new market. And so when people talk about whether it's RWAs or even stablecoins today, I think the too skeuomorphic way of thinking about it is, okay, well, we're going to do local currency stablecoins of, pick a country for use in that country. I don't think so, actually, because a lot of folks, they don't need that, right? In most countries, domestic payments and everything work really well. Actually, I would say the country where domestic payments is the most painful is us right here. So if anyone needs a domestic stablecoin for everyday usage, it's actually probably us more so than any other country.
Why is it painful for us domestically?
Why is it painful? I mean, have you ever tried to do an ACH payment? I just had to do.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes, an ACH, a wire payment.
Yeah.
And then if I were to pay you right now, I don't know how I'd pay you. Venmo, and Venmo, it's like, it's okay, but you got to squint in order for that to be a good experience, or maybe a Cash App, but it's a painful experience. You have QR code payments, not really adopted, as highly fragmented. And then similarly, we get asked a lot with RWA issuance around the world, well, can I sell this I want to tokenize this and sell this to my existing customers? Oh, well, why would you do that? It's actually a worse experience for them. So it's all about selling to a new market. And so it's taking securities, equities, bonds, whatever it might be, an RWA from a home market and somehow enabling that distribution to an external market. It's growing capital market access. And so that's, I think, where the market becomes interesting. It's all the increasing distribution. And then similarly, if you want to talk about stablecoins, well, where the market is all about cross-border opportunities. That's also why, as an aside, I think that the primary market for stablecoins is going to be in US dollar usage for cross-border, which is where there's a huge amount of trade. And a lot of that is still being documented on, no kidding, paper, bills of lading, letters of credit, so on and so forth. And so I think those are the interesting markets that crypto actually brings real value to, rather than sort of being dropped into experiences that are easy to understand, but largely already solved because they are easy to understand.
I want to go back to this analogy because I like it a lot on the content distribution side of things. So I'll date myself a little bit too. I remember LimeWire and like that era of things, right? And so I guess the question for me is on the distribution side, we seem to have pretty functional, I'm not going to call them gray markets, but we have the LimeWires of crypto like functioning pretty well. How do we get to the Spotify era? Because you are talking about a lot of different value propositions, whether it's talking about people launching tokens, or do you think regulatory clarity is what would tip the scales there? Obviously, liquidity is a big piece of it, and we're seeing that come on chain, but where do you see that transition happening?
Well, I think that I believe that regulation should take place largely at the app and the asset level. And for a long time, when the focus in this industry was almost entirely on the underlying infrastructure, you guys, I'm not even sure that era is past us, but for basically the last 10 years, every venture investor was focused on infrastructure, infrastructure, and infrastructure. So then, of course, because that's where the industry is focused, and people thought, okay, well, that's where everything should also be regulated. And that would be like trying to put hooks into TCP/IP. When in reality, if this is meant to be, the reason I think we're all in this is because we think that this idea that you're going to have, core financial infrastructure available to everyone, low-level technology, it's not an application, is because there's going to be a full diversity of applications and also assets issued, the scope of which is beyond what any one of us is going to be able to imagine, right? And so if that's the case, then if there's going to be such a broad array of different applications, not least because you're going to have people using this infrastructure from not just New York to Oklahoma, but to Indonesia, no one knows what the range of things people are going to do and all the various behaviors and customizations and user experiences people are going to want. Okay, so there's not going to be one-size-fits-all regulation for apps, also not least because there's going to be 200 regulators involved in this, right? And then also at the asset layer, there are assets that are best off being fully permissionless, the purest form of your non-fungible token, which is where all of this started off. And then there will also be other use cases where people want that to look more like a revocable security type of instrument. They just want that to be in a digital wrapper. And that's also fine. And the narrative around that should not be, oh, that's like a non-crypto native asset because it's not censorship resistant. the whole range of use cases is going to exist, and so you've got to have options for the whole range of use cases. So permissioning, control, regulation, so on and so forth at the app and then the asset layer, I think is how you combine the permissionless nature of having global liquidity with the necessary controls and customizations that users are going to want.
Do you think it's more of a regulatory job to regulate the industry then, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all job? Like you say, it's one-size-fits-all, right? So we have a bill, obviously, going through Congress right now, which is pretty sweeping, probably covers like 80% of the crypto market if you cut out stablecoins. So would you say that's the best approach, best practices, or would you say like more from a regulator standpoint, like an SEC, CFTC?
Yeah.
What's your take on that? It sounded like you think, because it's pretty, different
Yeah.
parts of the industry need different types of regulation, right?
I think that innovation always comes before any of these things, and I would say that innovation has preceded this by, depending on how you count, half a decade, or 2 decades. So we've got to do what we can here in the US. Nothing is ever perfect. I don't think anyone pretends that we have a perfectly tuned policy, legislative, judicial, or anything governance system, but at least we can talk about that openly. Can't let the great kill the good, but we'll kind of do what we can in the window that we have. And that's, I think, likely what's going to happen here in the US. And it's important for the US to show that leadership just because we are the primary capital market in the world. And even if what we come up with is imperfect, that still demonstrates leadership and acceptance for crypto in so many ways to the rest of the world. And I feel like I've just really lived and breathed that over the last year, just saying, as soon as the Genius Act got passed, literally within 1 month, within 2 months, that was the talk of the town in so many different jurisdictions around the world. And so even if, for us, because we are in the belly of the beast and we're so involved in like the actual specifics of the legislation, all of us here, given that it is germane to this market. And so the substance aside, there's also an element of this which is very symbolic that once the US signals that this is something we care about and this is something that we want to exert leadership on, people just follow that around the world. So that's important.
When you think to the future of Solana, is it going to be winning in a few key verticals on the financialization front, or do you kind of see it being across the board the way a lot of these chains historically have been like generalist chains, so to speak?
Yeah, I think you got to be generalist chain. And I think that in retrospect, I think taking too much of an application-specific view of infrastructure is you paint yourself into a corner. It's like saying, what vertical of information exchange is the internet going to win? Over the long term, the answer is all of the above. In any shorter time frame, then you could point to, it was like cat videos, okay, cool, right? And then there's email, and there's what we're all doing in college with LimeWare, Kazaa, Pirate Bay, you don't need to tell me which one or all of the above. And so at any given point in time, yes, there is a trend and there is a vertical of focus, but over the longer arc, the answer is necessarily all of the above. And I think one of the large explorations that this industry has gone through, and I think this industry has been largely wrong on, is taking too tech-oriented a view of financial infrastructure and being too application-oriented and thinking, because if you look at the various architectures that have been proposed, they've been proposed partially because there are true scaling issues in the research and the engineering, but then also because there was a little bit of this thinking that, as technologists are building many of these things, that, okay, there were parachains, app chains, L2s and L3s, subnets, you name it. Different names for all sorts of different things. But the core trade-off that each of them were making is they're trading off unified liquidity for application specificity. That is a tech-driven view of the world. That is not a finance-driven view of the world. And that is a fundamentally mistaken assumption in this industry.
Lily, I think on that forward-looking view, I know we're running out of time, but we can't let you go without asking about the future. AI and crypto. There's been a lot of talk about agentic payments in that space. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, so I think that if you see blockchains as being infrastructure for economies, then up until now, we've largely seen that in the scope of, well, economies are between human beings. And, well, there's this whole new economy which is between machines, and obviously they're going to pay each other with crypto, not with credit cards. I think that's been acknowledged for quite some time now. And so I see it from the perspective of here's an entirely new economy to go build a financial infrastructure for that new economy. And so I think that for me is the simplest way that I think AI and crypto coming together, and clearly agentic payments is a big part of it. That is obviously pretty foundational to becoming financial rails for a machine economy. I think definitionally so, but I think that's a huge area. That's going to be, I think, where DePIN also goes, right? DePIN, I think starting in 2022, it was about using crypto as a way of launching a token, incentivizing community to come together, organize the incentives of a community. And now maybe there's a perspective that those sensors themselves will be directly interacting with one another, and so you're able to bootstrap a community around the people, and now you can bootstrap an economy around those sensors themselves. So I think there's probably some version of DePIN that comes back in the future, and it'll be interesting to see how the existing DePIN tokens and then future machine-to-machine economy also comes together. So, but I think that the things that are going to be built in crypto, in a way, I think they've all been written about before. So bad news for us is that none of this is news. It's all been written about in a Bitcoin Talk forum, probably 2014 or pre-2014. So in a way, maybe we just point our AI at those forums, and then there's like the list of ideas of things we should build. I don't know.
There you go. We'll just vibe code all of it. Yeah.
Kind of.
Well, we'll have to have you back on for Take Two to dive into all of this and more. But thank you for joining us on stage, and thank you to the audience and Solana Policy Institute for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.